Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 340. I'm delighted to be joined back. Everyone thought he'd been sacked, but it's not true. My co-host is back, Jordan Tyra. How are we doing?
I'm all good, thanks. I'm still, as you can see, still wearing the t-shirt from the conference as well. I haven't taken it off yet. But no, it's yeah, very good to be back.
Rumor has it he slept in that since the actual day. So yeah, I can imagine the smell.
They're nice t-shirts.
We are joined today. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast. It's been a little while, Si, but Simon Whitehead joins us. Si, how are we doing?
All good, thanks, Ben. Yourself?
Good, thank you, mate. Very good. We're going to treat this episode. We're going to do a little reflection on the podcast last week, but I think it's going to bring out a few key topics, just industry topics as well, which I think we can all jump in on and give a bit of input on. So we'll just start from our perspective, just how we found it, because I think with conferences, obviously it's slightly different from my perspective, probably Jordan's perspective when you're running something. But I'd be keen to hear from you, Si, from the 2 days. What were some of the key reflections and takeaways that you took from the conversations and the presentations?
No, I think for me, it was a different type of conference in a really good way, in that people had a lot more flexibility and kind of choice over maybe the topics they're interested in or things that they want to go and see or do, across like different rooms as well. So that you know, typical conference, you sat there drinking coffee after coffee in the same seat for 10 hours of the day. Probably not good for anyone. So it kind of kept everyone engaged. And yeah, I thought that the range of speakers as well, across so many different kind of really top practitioners and people that have been and done a lot of top things with regards to research, with regards to experience, obviously sports tech as well. I think just bringing everything together was really nice to see, and I'm sure that everyone that went would agree that it was a different type of conference, in a really good way, in that people could have that flexibility and that choice around what they really wanted to dive into.
Jordan, we've had a few chats since it, and I know we've sort of echoed some of that as well. I think it was some of the key standouts, and there was key people that maybe we wanted to see and that people really took a lot from. The roundtables were definitely one, weren't they? Which obviously Si was part of. What were some of the key things that you took from the couple of days?
Oh, yeah, it really just, I think the variety on show was awesome. We try to make it that way, in terms of getting a variety of speakers from different backgrounds, different roles, different sports as well. And I think that went down really, really well. I mean, I was in Howard Green's one, on movement patterns, and Howard's background is predominantly all tennis. Which on the face of it, you might go, well, what's that got in relation to us? But then when you actually broke down all the movements he was going through, you could see there was so much that tied in, and actually a lot of talks followed on from each other really, really nicely. So Angela's first keynote, of the whole conference on the Tuesday was talking about train the brain, and certainly from a rehab point of view, how when we're getting back to not just close to the pitch, but when we're first early stage rehab, we're trying to train the brain in different ways as well as the body. And that theme kind of continued out throughout a lot of the conversations and a lot of the topics throughout the 2 days, which was awesome. And we were talking about like just motor control, coordination, proprioception, loads of those kept coming back in, and how we can challenge people's practice in that way. And I think that was organic. We didn't plan that. But we did a little bit in terms of, obviously we were telling the speakers, who else was speaking and what they were speaking on. But I just felt like it flowed really well. So yeah, I mean, we've got obviously the feedback as well, and the feedback's been really positive, and a lot of people echoed. I think the roundtables though were really nice, and the keynotes as well. The keynotes were, for me, the highlights would probably be JP or Jerome's and Ben's keynotes. We've seen Angela present before at our West Brom event, and I knew she'd be outstanding, and lo and behold, she was. I then got to demo a little bit, didn't I, at the end with the funky glasses, which for anyone who wasn't there, basically imagine light on, light off glasses, and trying to do some balanced tasks with that, and that was tough. So that was good to get involved with that. But loved it, loved every minute.
So I know you put a post out, didn't you, on LinkedIn afterwards, mentioning about giving perspective to industry, and also I think you mentioned that it showed some of the initial reasons why you and I'm sure many others, us included, got into that industry in terms of impact with players and practitioners. I think it's a really important point, isn't it? That it gives a bit of reflection sometimes on actually why we do what we do.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it was JP actually that brought up an interesting point that, like, in terms of like the gut and kind of going off a bit more of a human sort of first approach sometimes. I think that our industry has very much been dominated for a long time, and rightly so, by evidence and literature and kind of what can be proven and different studies that have shown different types of things. But if you are looking at the research from maybe a human first standpoint, what was the sample population? Were they kind of high school collegiate athletes? What's the context behind them? Each individual, what are their learning styles? A lot of that can also dictate, research and the outcomes of that. So I think his point around kind of, a human first approach and again, like Jordan said, I think that was a theme, throughout, the conference, especially with all the keynotes. I think Ben had some really good insights as well. But for me, yeah, I think when you think about the highs and lows of sport, of football, whatever it might be, there's always a memory or a connection or something relating to the human side of things that almost pops into your head first. So I think it was really refreshing, I think, to see that, because again, within our industry, we can get bogged down with data and science and evidence and again, within certain contexts, like rightly so. But for me, that was just a really interesting part of it and something that I think the conference did really well, and obviously the network itself as well, just have people to lean on and exploring things as human beings, not just as kind of robotic practitioners.
I want to go into that with you, Si, because obviously you spent a lot of time in clubs, face to face with players on a daily basis, and now your role is different. I know you still get that element, but it's different now, isn't it? And you can maybe expand on that in a second.
Yeah.
I want to dive into that relationship side because we talk about it all the time in terms of the importance of developing relationships. We did the two-part with Mark Laws where we broke it down in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of developing those relationships. So we know the importance of it. How's your experience changed from being in club day to day to now working with clubs? We just talked before we started recording about different places you've been going to. How's that now changed? And is there a difference between how you have to develop these relationships now?
Yeah, I think obviously when you're in football and you're in club environments, you're constantly people facing, whether that be other members of staff, players, in academy settings, parents, whatever it might be. And I think that's at the forefront of everything you do. How you engage with people, how you speak to people, is a massive part of that. And I think from my time in club football, you're as a sports scientist or kind of one of the performance staff, you're almost like the gatekeeper a little bit sometimes between players coming in the morning, kind of chatting away to them, understanding kind of where they're at and how they're feeling, and then almost like feeding back to the coaches, before training, and almost having that trust element to know that certain players might want to tell you stuff that maybe doesn't need to be fed back to the coaches, and you can take that context yourself, and then they feel safer in an environment where they can speak to you and understand that maybe what you say doesn't go higher up, because I think a lot of players might be sometimes afraid of that. But then also the other side of it, being able to speak to coaches and essentially get your kind of points across to coaches in a manner that kind of everyone understands and everyone can kind of buy into. And obviously one of JP's is don't talk nerd. And I think that's really important because you've got coaches that are really into data and kind of like love data and the impact that kind of performance data can have on performance, and you've got people that maybe aren't well versed with that and aren't as maybe educated or clued up on it. So I think it's important that you find that balance and you find a relationship with those people where you can talk on terms where everyone can kind of understand. Going to my role now, I think it's more of a bird's eye view approach. We go into a lot of clubs, current clients, prospective clients, whatever it might be, and again, our relationships are being built sometimes with people that you don't know as opposed to being in club football where you're working with them every single day. So I think a lot of what I've developed over the last 10 years, I use a lot on a day-to-day basis, not only internally but externally when we're speaking to different clubs, and sometimes internationally, culture barriers or language barriers, whatever it might be. I think football really prepares you quite well for kind of like the real world with that, from that perspective as well.
What about the time on that side? Because obviously, being in club day to day with the same set of players, you've got a lot of time that you spend together. And it was mentioned recently at our Wigan event, Jimmy Barrow, I think it was Jimmy anyway, said about we live with the players. We're with the players all the time. We're on away trips all the time. You've got the relationships are so important. Whereas your time that you spend with a club or practitioners, you're going to be there, but then you're going to be coming away as well, and it's going to be a bit more remote, isn't it? So does that change maybe the conversations that you have or the approach that you take to developing that relationship with that person, or is it just a condensed sort of version?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that, as we all know, working in football, it's quite a unique industry, so to speak. There's a lot of kind of, I guess, football specific culture that if you haven't been in football can take you a little bit of time to get up to speed with, different environments and the way different people work. So I think having had that experience, I'm able to then, be picked up and dropped into a club, so to speak, and be able to pick up on certain maybe traits or certain cultures or certain nuances that maybe for someone that hasn't worked in football might not understand or might not quite grasp. So I think that's helped me, to sort of build them relationships from the off, because you kind of get the industry, you get what the practitioners are having to do every day, you get what the players are going through every day, and the challenges that people face as a coaching group, as a club, from clubs at the top of the league where everything's going really well and you could probably drop in any day and everything's honky dory, and then you've got clubs that are on the third manager battling relegation with 3 games in a week, probably not a great time to be going in, so you kind of understand those differences as well, and how you can impact them because essentially what we do is we help to support clubs and we help them get the best provision out of, for example, their GPS technology. So for us, it's very much about fitting into their model. It's not about when we think it's a good time to come in or when we want to. Everything we do is based around what the club wants and what the club needs and what the practitioner needs. So I think that background's massively helped in my role, and something that I really enjoy. I really work. My role is obviously a lot different now from going to day-to-day football to kind of working around football, so to speak. But again, going back to what I enjoy is kind of working closely with people and building relationships and trying to impact people. I do that. I do the same thing now, just in a kind of different way.
Do you reflect on that time in clubs and how different it would have been for maybe you to step into the role now without that experience?
Yeah, massively, massively. I think football teaches you a lot. Going back to my time as an intern juggling uni and what you knew then, it's almost laughable. You almost like you look back on it with so many different experiences, so many different environments, different members of staff, different ways of working, different players with regards to how they are, their personalities. I think just everything that encompasses football can teach you so much, and a lot of that isn't done at, and it's no slouch on universities, for example, but a lot of that can't be taught. You know what I mean? It's something that you need to go and experience, you need to go and do, at the same time as understanding kind of how it all works. And yeah, you only get that from practical experience.
Jordan, if we refer back to the round table, obviously we gave you the graveyard shift side because we knew that you guys were the lineup that we put together. It was going to keep people around, and it was also going to develop some interesting conversations, which I think it did, to be fair. What were some of the standouts, George, for you from the round table?
Oh, great question. What was I? I think again, like Si's really kind of hit the nail on the head, really, in terms of the human side. Like we were obviously a lot of the questions were geared around the schedule, the demands of the EFL, like how hard it can be. I posed a question at the end as well to the panel in terms of like, do you think a winter break would be beneficial? When we're talking now a lot about like the schedule's just nuts and the recovery windows are so narrow and small that I was expecting to go, actually, I think a winter break would be quite nice. It would give a nice little break for the players and the staff to recharge and spend some time at home over Christmas or whatever it might be, right? And Ross Burby turned around and went, no, I think it's fluff. And I think it was really, and again, it showed how much he knows the players he's worked with, because the reason for that was because it's an excuse. If you ask the players, why do you want the winter break? it was a lot of them would be about, we want it to do it so we can get away and get our feet up in the sunshine. Not, I want to spend some time with, with like my family and all this sort of stuff. So I thought that was really interesting. Lots going on though. I think there's brilliant like fallouts from that in terms of, like I said, knowing your players really well inside out. And that gut feeling, yeah, like JP said, like Si alluded to as well, the gut feeling when you're working day to day in a club guides what you do. Probably more, in fact, definitely more than the data, in terms of, doing what's right for the players and stuff like that. So yeah, it was interesting and lots of good questions come off the back of it.
I think on that though as well, I think one of the biggest things that I took along those lines was, and James Morahan on the nutrition roundtable sort of summed this up as well, was the realities of working with players. And that's kind of what Ross is referring to there, isn't it? Like, winter break sounds great if we're using it for recovery and we're using it for the right reasons and all the rest of it. But he's just giving his reality in terms of probably the experiences that he's had with players. And not all players are going to be like that at all. But that's his perspective on it and his experience. I think what James was saying was really interesting along those same lines around nutrition and how we actually treat players. He's working with the best rugby players in the world, essentially. And he's got to label shakes. He's got to make the shakes for them. He's got to put the names on them. He's literally got to put it where they're going to be sat, because that's the reality of professional sport and football, isn't it? And you'd have had the experiences side of working with players, and we can have the best ideas in the world, but these are some of the real practical points that we've got to take away and apply. And I thought they're just two examples of practitioners that have been involved at the highest level that have given some real practical things to take away. But there was loads of that across the 2 days as well, wasn't there? Whereas it was like, this is like the ideal on paper, but this is actually how it works in practice.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, like you said, you got two practitioners that have worked, at the highest level, and they've all worked with completely different human beings. Like going back to, George's point about a winter break, you might have some kind of pros that have, two kids, a family, never get to see the kids in the morning because they're out the house going to training, this, that, and the other. They might want their winter break so that they feel kind of re-energized in terms of, being with their family and this, that, and the other. And you might have some like younger lads that just want to get away and go and get some winter sun. I think the reasoning behind it is always, going to be very, very personal. And then likewise, in the example there with James, it's so for the outside world, it probably seems crazy that you have to do that. You have to go to that level, but they're the fine margins that, for example, he's doing to make sure that that provision's in place and to make sure that everyone is, well catered for. I think Ben touched on it as well. I think his background, especially being, across like hockey and the Olympics and then football, he made an interesting point around his reference points around him, with different like training intensities and frequencies. He's got some Olympians that train 3 times a day, every day, and, maybe have one day off. And his reference points for what was kind of an optimal dose response relationship was all over the shop, from Olympians to hockey teams. So I think, again, a lot of what's maybe normal in football, I think, potentially there is scope to look at other practitioners, go and engage with other people and see how other people are doing it in different sports. Because for sure, there'll be sports that are, just as demanding as football with maybe slightly different methodologies. Not to say that one's right and one's wrong, but just to encourage them conversations and be a bit vulnerable about, am I doing it right? Or not necessarily right, but is there a different way? Could I explore something else to essentially always do the same thing? And that's to try and push people, push performance and keep moving the needle. I think that's what they're getting. For me, the conference enabled people to do is be a bit more vulnerable, ask the questions that you probably wouldn't do in a club environment because you're worried about, what your colleague next to you might think, or, your line manager, whatever it might be. And I think the roundtables are a really good way of doing that, because you're essentially drawing on so many different people's experiences in just a conversational format that people can take so much from, and relate that to their own practice.
Definitely. And that feeds back as well, John, we've had some feedback in already. And one of the questions we asked was around, give us the question actually, John, because you did it around the culture where we're talking about how to improve the practice, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got it open here. So one of the questions was, from the following, which method would you say is the greatest way to improve your practices? And then the options were visiting other football environments to observe their practices and discussing what they do, visiting other sporting environments to observe their practices and discussing what they do, having others observe you and your practices and discussing what you do, and then self-reflection and evaluation of your practices and not involving anyone else. And 100% of the answers was visiting other sporting environments to observe their practices and discussing what they do. And I thought that was really interesting because I thought more people would say having people to come and observe me that way. And obviously visiting other, but 100% saying going to other sporting environments. I thought that's really interesting. And I think we showed, again, I've referenced Howard, Si just referenced Ben there in terms of talking about other things. And he also said his wife was a GB kayaker, I think he said. He was training 3 times a day, like I was saying, hockey multiple times a day. And then here we are in football going, ooh, back-to-back days, not sure, and it's really interesting learning from those other sports, like I was saying. So yeah, the people agree with that clearly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also the feedback that we've had from people like Howard and that presenting, there's definitely a need and a want from people to explore different sports, isn't there? But it is fascinating that was 100%. I definitely thought there would have been more, even across clubs, because that's one thing we get a lot with our network meetings is that people don't have time, even if they're both Northwest clubs. And Si, you'd have seen this. You could be down the road to a Blackburn or a Preston or whatever, but you just don't really see them. Like you might see them on a match day, and that's pretty much it. But you're 20 minutes away. So I thought there'd have been a bit more of that. Like, it's an opportunity for us to go out and see other clubs or whatever. But to just 100% on different sports was fascinating.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think for me, it may be a bit of a taboo. I don't know if it's a taboo subject, but another, for example, a championship club practitioner going into another championship club, to see another championship club practitioner is almost like a big no-no. Like you can't come into kind of our doors and see what we're doing. Yeah, you meet them for a coffee or whatever it might be externally, but to actually go in and see that is almost like a red flag in the industry. Which is why it's quite interesting for me now being able to kind of go into different clubs and see different perspectives, because I think a lot of, and I think the conference again highlighted this, some of the issues or some of the problems that maybe practitioners face are not necessarily individual to that club. There's a lot of clubs facing very, very similar problems. And again, I think having that vulnerability to reach out and say, look, this is kind of an ongoing issue that we're having. It doesn't have to be, sensitive or release, specific details, but then just being able to draw on different experiences, because there is so much knowledge, experience, within the industry that, imagine if you could leverage just some of that and be able to kind of find a solution in half the time or try something that has worked for someone else that you might not have even thought of. So I think there's real value in that. And I get why it's difficult, especially, club to club, but that's where kind of other sports would completely break that barrier down where, there's no influence from, from a football club going in to see, I don't know, a rugby league club, for example, and go and see what they do and just kind of their training methodologies, a completely different sport. But yeah, they're all still trying to do the same thing. They're trying to get players to perform at their peak, and enjoy what they do and buy into everything that they're trying to do. And from if you really like strip it back from a principle perspective, no matter what sport you're in, team or individual, that's essentially what everyone wants.
That's why I thought your post was so good, Sam, because I think you brought up some real points that you've obviously taken away from the conference, but we've spoke about a lot just in terms of industry and like whether you call it trends or whatever, in terms of challenges that people are facing right now. Like the relationships is a key one, isn't it? We bang on about it all the time, but it's so important. And it came up again, like across all the presentations. You got numerous practitioners there presenting on a number of different topics, but a lot of the common themes kept coming through these presentations, didn't they, Jordan? It's interesting where they just keep coming up.
Yeah, and just going back to Si's point there in terms of visiting other clubs, I always chuckle at this one, and I've mentioned it before because clubs will be like, we can't have somebody coming in and look what we do, or can't go somebody else because it's bad. It's red flag a little bit. And yet a conference like this comes up and the clubs are like, yeah, I'll pay for your ticket, and then all the practitioners from those clubs will be like, oh yeah, we need CPD, really important. We'll pay for your ticket. We'll make sure you're getting consistent CPD. And then all the practitioners from those clubs go and meet up. What do you think they're talking about?
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing at my club? This is what we're doing, and you're just sharing ideas. So it's like the clubs. I get it. You got to protect your assets, right? And you can't be saying, right, this is the formation we're going to play on Saturday, obviously. But like Si said, you break it down to a fundamental level. We're looking at how do we improve performance and get players, professional athletes, to perform at their top and peak level. Fine, and then me going and speaking, with somebody down the road at a different rival club. Me go, oh, okay, I really like that. Have you seen the new latest bit of tech? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? That isn't giving away industry secrets. And at the end of the day, we'll move on. One day we'll move to a different club and you'll go, oh, by the way, when I was at such and such club, we did this. This really worked. Have we thought about trying this? So this whole idea of secrecy thing, I get it. You're protecting your assets, but at the same time, it's like we can chat to each other. Like it isn't like you can't do that, and I think clubs forget that sometimes. But yeah, just the like I said, the current themes and everyone's facing, it's the same problems. It's the same problems, and we're all. This is why the conferences and our events and everything are so nice, because people will then get an opportunity to ask a mate or ask somebody. Certainly if you're in a junior position, if you're in a position for the last sort of 2-3 years, and you're only just relatively starting out on your journey, and you're facing a problem that somebody who's been in the industry for 10, 20, 30 years has faced and solved multiple times or done it a long time ago. Conferences and events are the opportunity to go and speak to those people and go, all right, this is the problem we're facing. They can give that bit of advice and the industry gets better, and ultimately that person will go back to their club and they'll be able to solve that problem or be better equipped to solve that problem. So, just a funny comment on that. I get it why you got to protect your assets and things, but sometimes, people talk anyway, like just let it happen.
Just on that point, though, as well, a couple of things that I was thought of then. One was really interesting from Ben, where I think someone asked him about possibly the England role that he had and the approach he took with England, and how would he sort of analyse the work that he did, or what changes would he make and things like that. And he said, change everything, because on reflection, like you're going to go back in, you know the changes that you're going to make because you've already had the program in place. So that was fascinating on that point. The other one that I thought of was Kyle actually asked this to the women's football roundtable, was around the women's game and asking the coaches how much they bear in mind their individual sort of club and their performances from the club, or the broader side of bringing on the women's game. That's a massive difference between the men's and the women's game, isn't it? That there probably are a fair few involved in the women's game that are looking at it and going, we need to drive women's football forward because it's on that trajectory, isn't it? Like it's just kicking on all the time. On the men's side, I don't see that as being the case at all, which is interesting because, like, I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but it's just such a big difference, isn't it? And I thought it was really interesting when you put that to, I think Hannah actually answered it in the end of Tottenham. Well, that was a really interesting comparison between the two sides.
Yeah, and you think about it from, let's take the Premier League or let's take the Championship. Like, Championship clubs are all fighting for the same goal, to get into the Premier League, right? So as the Championship, you are sort of, you might be thinking we're competing against all the other teams, but actually there is a wider context that you are, how do you generate or grow the Championship's appeal so that the Championship gets better, we can better prepare to then get in the Premier League. Or if you look at like bottom half Premier League clubs, you're sort of grouped together, if you like, to fight the top half. Because let's be honest, the Premier League now is mini leagues within the league, isn't it? Look at the bottom three that have come up and gone straight down, multiple times now. So you are kind of working together, but you're 100% right. Like, and I knew it from my time in women's football, there was just this sort of wider context that everyone had this sort of feeling of, is it going to improve the women's game? Can we do it? Yes, let's do it. Whereas men's game's definitely more siloed. And this is how we do it at our club, and we can't share and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, we've moved the conversation on a little bit, haven't we? To we've got to be better at sharing and stuff. But the conference definitely was a great opportunity for a lot of people to share and chat and catch up. And like Si says, the circuit, when you're in it, you're kind of stuck in it a little bit. And now that he's in his role, and I know you are, mate, that you're going around and getting to see all these different environments, it's probably quite refreshing to, just for your own personal point of view, I'm guessing, just pick little bits from each club that you see and keep an hold of that. Is that the case now?
Yeah, I think, yeah, going back to your point there, I think if you were to look across, like you say, the Premier League, the Championship, take any league, and you look at like the knowledge base of said practitioners in each club, the knowledge base will probably be there or thereabouts. There's not a massive gulf in someone knows absolutely everything and someone knows nothing. I think what makes that difference is the experiences that people have, the network that people have. Who can they lean on? Who can they draw on? What experiences can they draw from? And if you could promote more of that, you would have more practitioners with greater experiences, with greater kind of solutions in their toolkit to be able to tackle the things that we're trying to tackle. So I think, like you say, that kind of sharing element can only happen the more experience you get. If you go and visit other sports and go and see other practitioners, and as an S&C coach, go and visit a sports scientist, or as a physiotherapist, go and visit an S&C coach, or a different club, to give yourself a different perspective of something within that industry. But yeah, I think for me it is really interesting because, like you say, I think there's some clubs that do think they have like a secret sauce, and it's very very much kind of, this is what we do, and if we let anyone else see this, like, all hell's going to break loose. But I think when you strip it back, I think, yes, of course there's differences between the way in which certain people do certain things. However, everyone is like chasing that common goal, and how you get there or how you do it will vary from club to club. The method of which you take, are you a data driven approach, are you what tactical model you're using, whatever it might be. But everyone has a way in which they work as a unit, as a staffing group, and as a group of players to be able to get to from A to B. And whether that's in the Championship trying to get promoted, or in the Premier League trying to stay in the league, whatever it might be, that's essentially the end goal. So for my role now, yeah, it is really interesting going across Europe, across across the MLS, wherever else it might take me. It's interesting to see, football's football essentially at the end of the day, and a lot of clubs are doing a lot of similar things. Don't get me wrong, there's some clubs that are, doing things slightly differently, but if we're talking, on the whole, everyone's again got that common goal of how can we drive the club forward, how can we drive the players forward, how can we get more success, individually and collectively. And yeah, I think that's kind of on the forefront of everyone's mind that works in football or works in high performance.
So I wanted to ask, because you guys had a lot of conversations with people that were at the event. What were some of the common things they were bringing to you, like challenge-wise, questions? Obviously, from STATSports perspective, between yourself, Ocean, and Kian, what were some of the questions that you guys were getting?
Yeah, I think time. I think time is always the biggest talking point. I think where practitioners lie, especially as a junior practitioner, for example. Well, even as a senior practitioner, I think your time is split differently. As a senior, it's probably around more kind of departmental meetings and bridging gaps between different departments. As a junior practitioner, you're probably running around doing 5, 6 different jobs within your role, depending on the club you're at. So I think time is always a massive talking point, especially when you then start to talk about integrating technology and integrating data. And a lot of the conversations we had, it was around practitioners coming to us saying, like, how does the system, how can we save more time? Essentially, we're getting after training. You don't want to then be sat at your desk for hours on end trying to generate reports and fill in well-being questionnaires and trying to pull everything together to then report on. It's how do we streamline that process? So I'm one person that does 5 jobs, but if we could, as a company, if we can save you so much more time in this specific job, if we just take GPS, and alleviate more tools and more kind of leverages to enhance your capabilities to do your job, like, that's, for me, it is gold, for people to kind of use the tech and it not take a long time to download, to generate reports, to do all the things that they want to do. So a lot of the conversations we had were around, yeah, especially with kind of the new kind of features in the software, force velocity profiling, the sprint split analysis stuff that we've got. It can massively save time for practitioners that are, they have a lot of things to do. It then enables them to go back to the human side, go and speak to players, go and check in on players, do extras with players, whatever it might be, as opposed to sitting at your desk until it's time to go home because you've got, different reports and different pieces of a puzzle to put together. So I'd say that was probably the biggest thing that we kind of spoke to a lot of the guys at the conference about.
Yeah, it's interesting that because that was one of the key things that came up at the Preston event. And I actually asked Luke at Preston about that if you save time by using tech, what do you use that time for? And his thing was just being around the players, like literally instead of taking myself off away and having time away from the players, I could be around them when they're eating or whatever they're doing. I can just have more time with them, and it's obviously something that's key and wanted by practitioners, and they understand the importance of that as well, don't they? And the whole one man band or one woman band idea is interesting, isn't it? Because if they're in control of all the different responsibilities and roles that need doing, it must be hard to find that time then to do the things that we bang on about all the time in terms of creating them relationships, Jordan, mustn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think all three of us have been in those roles, those one-man band roles. So yeah, you are just constantly spinning plates. And I remember early days in previous roles when you've created your own GPS database and stuff and things, and then you literally finish training in an afternoon. You don't see the players again until they go because you are just heading a laptop. And I don't think anyone will say that's gold or best practice in terms of developing players and relationships with players. So yeah, like Si saying, the tech, the more streamlined it's getting, the better it's going to be for us as practitioners to then have that time back in our day to then reinvest that back into the players, because that's how players win the football matches. So that's how we're going to, make them better. But it's interesting that we're talking about tech because, again, at the start of the questionnaire that we gave out, or the feedback with a few questions as well, we were asking about AI, weren't we? In terms of, AI now is obviously massive in the world, let alone football. And we put the first, was it three? Yeah, first three questions looking at how AI influences people's current practice. First one was literally, how much does AI currently influence your practice? And 55%, so the massive majority, was saying a lot. And I put e.g. multiple uses per day. And then the other three were pretty split, with sometimes barely and never. So most practitioners, are using it a lot. Then when we said, how do you currently implement AI? Again, same proportion, a lot, 55% are using it to general day-to-day tasks. And a few are using it for automating processes and streamlining. And then a few are using it as predictions for flagging injuries or like prediction tools and stuff like that. But the majority of people are using AI for your general day-to-day tasks, which to me tells me exactly what we just said, that people are trying to find 5, 10 extra minutes in the day just by streamlining emails. Because then we said, what sort of thing is it for? And it's around emails and general sort of responses to stuff, and it's like, that's what we're trying to just cut down on, that fluff and that wasted time using technology. Now, it'd be really interesting if we, in 5 years' time, were to sort of re-put this out and ask this question again, how that would, when it says, how do you currently implement AI, if that changes to the more people are asking automating processes, and that we start to trust AI even more, because we trust AI to write a response for us to an email, or write a quick report on something. But I think over time we're going to trust it more and more and more to then go, right, fully, and I know some people are already doing this, to fully write the report down, do everything for us and go, and then we can take what used to take 2 hours into 10 minutes. So I'm not surprised that when people are asking people are saying, how do I get more time? What's the stuff we're going to get? Because that's ultimately what we want: more time with players to improve them.
Yeah, I think so.
And we're trying to. I was just going to say, we're trying to find those easy wins, aren't we? So from your point of view, I'm guessing that's something that STATSport know, and the company know that, right, how can we streamline? How can we streamline so that we can be better prepare, practitioners and players?
Yeah, 100%. I think part of my role as well is to kind of feed back to our kind of product and software teams and make sure we're actually building something that fits to what coaches, sports scientists, practitioners need day to day. Because, it's not just features that we think would be nice to have, or, we build internally and think, oh, that's really good. It's pointless if it's not going to be then used in the kind of the real world. So the things that we're implementing into the system, and again, AI is obviously a big topic, and there'll be loads to come where that's concerned. But they're things that will genuinely help practitioners on a daily basis. So Yeah, I think when you're going back to saving time, I think if you're, and for a long time it was like this, where you're a practitioner that gets in the morning, you might collect well-being data, and then you plan the session, and then you go and do activation, and then you go and do your warm-up. You get back in, you don't, and if you're in that mindset, or you're in that process of doing this, seeing the players in the same environments in the same time of day every single day, you're not really going to learn too much about your players. You're just going to learn how they are or how they act in certain environments. You're going to have the ones that really hate pre-activations. You're going to have the ones that love gym sessions, the ones that don't like to push themselves. But go and have a look at them. What they're eating at lunchtime, what they're talking about, what are they, have they got anything going on in the private life, whatever it might be, will teach you, once you have the fundamentals in place, it's going to teach you so much more about your players, and then how that can inform your practice. If a player's just, you know, just had a baby, or has a young family, and they're getting in every morning looking wrecked. There's no point in someone hammering them that they've not had enough sleep or whatever, because it's completely out of their control. So again, a very vague kind of example, but it just goes to show that for the time that you see your players in the club environment is an absolute fraction of the day, of the month, of the year. Although people do kind of live together and work together so closely. So I think the more you know about your players, the more that you can inform then your practices with regards to the things that you're doing with them on a day-to-day basis, whether it be gym sessions, activations, warm-ups, how do you engage them? And I thought, Ben's kind of what do you call it, maybe competition continuum was really interesting. And again, that's probably something that he's built around his different experiences. It's not, I've worked in football, so I think this is a really good thing to implement. He's probably taken that from a number of different kind of, like you say, individual sports and team sports and Olympic sports, whatever it might be. And I think everyone could take so much value in them, not even just from a coaching perspective, but or from an S&C or sports science perspective. But for me, it could be applied to anything. It just comes back to relationships and knowing your players, to how to get to the best from their personalities and their learning styles, which I know obviously was spoken quite a lot about within the different kind of topics and keynotes of the conference. So yeah, really interesting stuff.
So to wrap things up, maybe tapping into some of these challenges and some of these conversations you've had with coaches, what's the next sort of steps for STATSports? What have you guys got coming up?
Yeah, so obviously we've just released our brand new kind of hardware. So our Apex 2.0, so brand new unit, brand new docking station, live streaming beacon. Our software is constantly evolving. So a couple of the things that we now have that clubs are kind of implementing, before they've gone off for the off season, and will no doubt implement when they come back, is a big thing for me was, and the company was, how do we bridge that gap between training and testing? Because for a long time as a practitioner, you have your testing windows, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. As a player, that's seen as quite alien. Like, okay, today I'm being tested. It's out the ordinary. So how do we merge the two? How do we turn training into testing, testing into training, to try and continually assess players or continually get feedback for players? So our force velocity profiling is something that's quite revolutionary, to be honest, with regards to being able to profile players on the pitch, because typically a lot of force velocity profiling is done in a gym-based setting. And how many times have you had a player on a Nord board that can pull 600-700, and then they go back out onto the pitch, and maybe something's wrong, or they start to feel things within hamstrings, for example. So how do we really bridge that gap to know that what we're seeing on the pitch and what we're trying to do in the gym is actually uniform, and one's complementing the other? Yeah, so essentially you can get a force velocity profile now for each one of your players. And again, talking about workflow, it's not a one by one, test individually. You can test multiple players at the same time, and the software will automatically derive that data for you. And then the other one is this sprint split analysis. So, traditional days of timing gates and setting up gates and running players one by one with, tape measures and, 12 tripods and whatever it might be, which is laborious, workflow for practitioners to actually go and set up, and it's time consuming. I don't know any practitioner that would really love to go and set that up. We can now get that straight from the unit, so you can sprint 20 players at the same time if you wanted to, mark out whatever it is, 40 meters, and then you can get real actual insights in terms of split times over 5 meter intervals, 10 meter, completely customizable. And then you can sort of bridge that gap. Because one of the questions I was always asked as a practitioner when testing came around, with timing gates, was you might have a player that runs, 3.96 over, 30 meters. Well, my top speed's 9.46 meters per second. So like, what's the difference? And those things for players are really important because, that's just seen as testing, because that's my, 3.96 seconds over 30 meters. That's my testing score. But the thing that I get reported on and things that I get fed back on every day is a meters per second score, in a practical example. So again, just that being able to then test players on the pitch, but in an environment or in a language that they understand and that they can get feedback for is massive. And that time saving element of being able to do all that in the software, it's all automated. So it'll be massive for practitioners moving forward. And that's just to scratch the surface. We could sit here all day talking about kind of the things that are on the horizon for us, and I'm sure things will escalate and change a lot in the next 6 to 12 months with regards to a lot of things that we've got coming out. But those are just a couple of the things that are already out there and practitioners are already using to, again, alleviate those kind of time heavy tasks and time consuming tasks.
Brilliant. Exciting times, mate. That's quality. Si, just finishes off. If people have got questions, there might be people from the conference as well that may be listening or watching this that thought, I didn't take Si's number or whatever it was. Like, I'm not saying to give your number out here, man, but what would...
Not anyone would want it anyway.
Where would be the best place for people to drop you a message?
Probably LinkedIn, to be honest, or if not, Twitter, or X as it's known as now, at ST Whitehead. So yeah, and by all means, it's something I'm quite big on, and for just reach out, ask the question, if there are any, because I think that's one thing that the conference kind of exacerbated to me, was that the ability to feel vulnerable sometimes in a public setting isn't always everyone's cup of tea, and you don't want to put your hand up and ask a question in front of a room full of people. That's just the way some people are. So I think, don't be afraid to ask questions to certain practitioners, on a private basis as well, because ultimately, you'll probably get more of their attention and an answer that you can maybe dive into a little bit more. So yeah, for sure, more than happy for people to reach out to me if it's, STATSports related, if it's completely unrelated to STATSports. That's where to find me.
Well, awesome. We'll post his number in the show notes, Jordan. We won't tell him.
Yeah.
Lads, thank you very much. That was absolute quality. Really appreciate you coming on, Si. Good to catch up again. And George,
you too, guys.
Thanks a lot, guys.
See you soon.
Jordan, it's felt like a little while actually since we've done a podcast together and done it here in this setting as well. Because obviously the last one I did was with the students at UA92. And then the conference kind of took over, didn't it? But it was class to have Si on. I thought his post as well, for anyone that's not seen it over on LinkedIn, was a really nice summary of his experiences, but sort of we expanded on a lot of the points there in the episode of what he actually brought up as well. So it's nice to hear that someone like Si, with the experiences that he's got, are taking away the things that he took away, which is essentially why we set the conference up, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And we've known Si for a long time. I went to uni with Si. We did our masters together, so I know his experience as well. The post is really good because, yes, he's now at STATSport, but he's had multiple roles in football. He was head of Academy Sports Science and Medicine at Burnley. A proper club. So his experience in football is top notch as well, and that's why we wanted him on the roundtable. So it worked really nicely and organically that, yes, STATSport sponsored the conference, but the staff that obviously Si and the other staff that are there from STATSport, know football inside out. So because we've all been to conferences as well, haven't we, where sponsors have a speaking slot, or they're there and it just feels a bit detached sometimes. And we wanted to try and avoid that. So to all our sponsors, but certainly to STATSport, they did a great job. And like Si was alluding to in the episode, people are coming to them with real world problems, and STATSport are trying to work on real world solutions. So yeah, just really, really nice. And his post summed it up really well. So yeah, I think that's a good way to sort of summarize how the conference went. And I think a lot of people's feelings on the conference as well.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it at the start of both days as well, that the whole team at STATSport really aligned with what we wanted to try and do in terms of the options, the topics that we wanted, giving people a real personal experience for the couple of days as well, where they could pick the journey out. Well, they also engaged, like, I had this conversation a couple of times today, like, they got out there, they came into the presentations, obviously Si was on the roundtable, but apart from that, they were actually engaging with everyone, which I'm sure they took a hell of a lot from, and that's exactly what we want. We want it to be like that. You can pick from Si, who's got great experience, go and have a chat with him. Obviously, you can speak about the work that STATSports are doing, but you can also pull from a lot of the experiences that he's had already. And like he mentioned, a lot of people are facing those same challenges. So the more conversations that we can create like that, the better. And I think that's what they definitely did that. And other sponsors did it as well, which was great to see. And that's exactly how we wanted it to run.
Yeah. And the whole event, the feedback, again, we're not going to bang the drum too much, but the event and the feedback was really, really positive around that element, that it felt, dare I say it, friendly. And it didn't feel like sales pitchy and even Owen from UA92, who were outstanding like hosts for the whole thing. Even they weren't it didn't feel like they were trying to pitch like, this is the UA92, like, get students to come here and all this sort of stuff. It just felt really organic. And that's, to be fair, I think that's the power of Football Fitness Federation, the brand that's been created mainly by yourself, is that, it is an environment where people should feel comfortable to share and to learn and to be a sponge. And that's the most important thing. So, just another big thank you to STATSports and a big thank you to Sai for obviously being on the roundtable as well. But for everyone that attended as well, I think it was a really, really good event. And yeah, we were really proud of it. We were really happy. We did our reflections, and we think there's a few little things we can change and improve, but that's always important, that we can move forward, make it better. But all in all, we were really happy with how it went. And I know a lot of people learned a lot from the days, and certainly our staff from the Physical Performance Hub, putting my other hat on, they came with us and learned a lot, and all the feedback they've said, because I've been able to have really in-depth conversations with them about it, they all brought so much away. So yeah, really, really good.
What I would say as well is we are keen for feedback. A lot of people have filled out the form already, but there's some that haven't. So check your emails, because we have sent it out on email. And give us some honest feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. We're all ears, because we've had some great comments and positive comments, but we've also had some really good points on how to make things better as well, which we definitely are going to take on and put into place. This was our first one. So yeah, we want to learn, and we want to make it a better experience for everyone, which we know we can do. So yeah, thank you to everyone that's done it already. And if you've not, check your emails, and hopefully if you can't find a link for whatever reason, drop us a message and we'll send it out. But just wanted to finish up by saying thank you to our sponsors for the podcast as well. So Hytro, the Good Prep, which I'm sure a lot of people met at the conference as well, kept everyone's bellies full for the couple of days. Bridge Athletic, and also Hawking Dynamics and STATSport as well. Make sure to check them all out. Obviously, Size talks about what STATSport have got coming up. Really exciting times. So make sure you go and give them a follow and show them some support, because they are supporting the podcast massively. And Jordan, just to echo what I said at the conference as well, I really appreciate all your help in the build up to it and on the days as well. And the fact that you gave me the kick up the arse to get it in gear as well. So I just want to say a massive thank you to you, and welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm back. We're going to be on it more, but thank you for your kind words. But yeah, schedules weren't aligning. I sessions coming out my ears, and we just couldn't quite get onto the podcast and things. But no, we're back. Let's do it. Conference is over. We're all ready to go and hit off season and pre-season really hard. So looking forward to the next one.
Awesome. Thanks, mate.
No worries. Catch you soon.